Hi, I'm Robin.
And I'm Tashama. We are lawyers by day and figuring life out by night.
In this episode, we will be covering the topics of the desirable age for egg freezing and how to cover your costs.
Before we get further into this episode, while both Tashama and I are lawyers, we are not your lawyers. We are not providing legal advice in this episode. We are simply sharing our thoughts and ideas. If you would like or require legal advice or representation, please contact an attorney directly. Also, while we may cover some health and wellness related topics, we are not doctors or psychologists. If you have medical questions, please consult your doctor. In addition, the content in this episode represents our opinions alone and not the opinions of any entity that we are employed by or associated with. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's get into this episode.
So, I'm very excited about the topic today on egg freezing. Both Robin and I have now undergone this process and can talk to you about some of our personal experiences about finding funding for this type of procedure and also why we froze our eggs at the timing that we did.
Right. So, I guess to get started, Tashama, how old were you when you decided to freeze your eggs?
So I was actually 39. That timing was good for me. It worked out well for me. But yeah, I was nearly 40. And in fact, I had pretty much thought about it in my mid 30s and getting into my late 30s, but ultimately I had a lot of things going on and I decided that I wouldn't do it right then. And then I kind of started thinking about it more as I was approaching 40, and decided I would like to ideally try to get it done before the age of 40. So I ended up doing the procedure at 39 years old. And so, how about you?
Right. So I actually had to do a few rounds. I had a lower than average egg count. So I did a few rounds when I was 36 and one round when I was 37, which so for me, I'm one of those individuals that probably it was better to do to egg freeze at a slightly younger age, just due to biologically how many eggs I produce each month. Um,
Yeah, and I think that you raise a really good point because this is very specific to individuals, which is why, again, we always recommend talking to your physician, and getting to understand really your own physical, and health situation. When I was younger, um, I thought about, a certain age of egg freezing. And, you kind of have these perceptions sometimes if you are not really intimately aware of this process. I had certain perceptions about it would need to be done by a certain date and that it couldn't be after a certain date. Um, and I was, as it turns out, wrong about that because I actually had a very successful round, at 39. And then, the flip side of it could be true. So you always want to get an idea of what your circumstance is because there are some people who would really, truly medically need to get it done way before the time that I did. But then there's some people that actually do it after the time that I did. So I cannot emphasize enough the importance of really just understanding your specific medical situation, really working with a healthcare professional, in this space, a fertility doctor that can really provide you with some tailored, medical knowledge about your individual situation and when it would be ideal for you. But I just think it's important for people to know, just because you might think, oh, I have to do it when I'm 33, or, oh, I have to do it when I'm this age. It could vary based on your individual circumstance.
right. I think that Tashama makes a really important point there. I mean, even personally, I know a lot of women that froze their eggs, well into their 40s and have had very successful pregnancies well into their 40s. I mean, yeah, and then that said, I mean, me personally, it was actually very lucky that I got checked out when I did, mostly just because, for me, it would have been a lot more difficult, because my eggs would have, well, generally your eggs decline, or the number of eggs decline as you
Yeah,
age. And for me personally, I had a very low egg count. So I think that it's good to get checked out as early as possible. But
agreed.
at the same time, I think that, if you are in your 40s and this is something you're interested in, I think that it's, definitely still worth getting checked out and seeing what your options are. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And in terms of the legal aspects, looking at it from the attorney angle, we know that there may be actually some legal restrictions that may come into play as well. So I agree with you about checking with your doctor, a fertility doctor, as soon as absolutely possible. If you think this might be something, even when you're young, that you may want to do at that time, that you might want to do in the future. I think it's important, like you just said, to consult with someone early and then just see what your options are. But if it's a little bit later in your, juncture, in your stage, still consult with the doctor. In terms of the legal restrictions, what are some of the legal considerations regarding age that one might want to be aware of?
Right. So, yeah. So, in addition to, what we just talked about, with, some biological issues,
Yeah.
um, this is very dependent on where you live as far as, what the age restrictions might be, as far as egg freezing. I mean, I've heard that there are, some jurisdictions, especially in other countries where, um, there's age cutoffs. I mean, sometimes as early as in your 30s. There's some countries, I think, late 40s. There also can be restrictions, with your marital status
Mm.
and egg freezing. Yeah, I mean, it all kind of depends on where you live. As far as I know, in California, there's no restrictions, as long as you can, biologically, still produce eggs. They will allow you to freeze them. So yeah, so I think it's very important to, in addition to considering some biological factors, to also consider, legal factors as to where you live.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly important point because as attorneys, over the years, we've seen how residency in a location can really make a difference in the governing law that one is under. This is the case across many different types of law and many different aspects of life, because there are local laws, there are state laws, there are national laws, and there are international laws. So, depending on what country, what state, what county, it could vary, particularly country and state. So you just want to be cognizant that there may be rules at play in addition to the biology of working with a medical professional. So certainly do your research, be informed, consult with the appropriate professionals, whether that be a local attorney, a local doctor, but just know sort of the rules and regulations, and options from a healthcare perspective that you may or may not have. And one of the other factors that we're talking about in this episode today relates to storage and cost. So overall cost of egg freezing is one thing, but one of the important factors in deciding to freeze your eggs and deciding when you're going to freeze your eggs really relates to storage costs over time, because unlike the fixed cost of doing the procedure and doing the collection and being in the hospital and et cetera, are the long-term, aspects of storage. And you have to have the eggs or embryos stored. You have to pay for that on a schedule, whether it's monthly or yearly, so long as those things are in existence. And so this, in my mind, factors into the age range. And I think that, a lot of medical providers kind of, urge people to think about this, is because if you were in your 20s, which some might regard as maybe biologically an optimal time from a fertility perspective, do you want to freeze your eggs in your early to mid 20s and then have to pay storage basically in perpetuity, unless you are planning to use the eggs or embryos shortly thereafter? So it's very important to consider, your age, how much you want to pay or how much you're able to pay over time, when you think you may be able to use your eggs or embryos, and how that factors into storage costs that would potentially be with you for years and years and years and years to come. It's very interesting. It's something that we had to decide as we were going through this process. And, now that we're even past this, we still pay storage cost, right?
Right, right. Yeah, so Tashama makes a really good point here. There's also a lot of legal issues relating to storage, and obviously, you're storing your eggs until you use them, but a lot of times you do have some excess eggs or excess embryos. Um, so, and uh, right now, at least in 2025, there's a lot of controversial court opinions that have come up that make it a little bit harder to destroy, embryos. And so there's, different considerations with eggs and embryos and a lot of factors and complications there. We actually do have another episode that we've released that specifically talks about this legal issue, and we will link that episode down below. So actually did want to dive a little bit more into costs too. Deshana, can you talk a little bit about your experience, finding funding for this this procedure? I mean, it is a very, I'm not gonna lie, it is a little bit pricey.
A little?
Yeah, no,
Really, Robin? A
yeah, I
little?
know. Yeah,
That's a very
it's
that's a
like,
very diplomatic way of saying it
yeah.
costs a crap ton.
Unfortunately in the US, there's excellent doctors, at least in California, but the procedure is not cheap. So Tashama, can you, I don't know, maybe talk a little bit about your experience and ways you found funding and any useful tips that you can think of for
Absolutely.
funding this procedure.
Sure. Happy to talk about this topic, because, yeah, I mean, I definitely want to let as many people know as possible that, especially if you're considering this and you think it might be right for you, it certainly can be very, very expensive. Some people might even regard it as cost prohibitive. And I feel that, there are ways to accomplish this from a financial perspective if you truly want to do that. So I was obviously joking around with Robin regarding the cost, but it was not cheap. And it can vary based on how many rounds you do, a number of different factors. I think that my one round ended up, it was between $10,000 and $20,000 for one round, because you have to pay for the medications, you have to pay for the expertise of the physician, you have to pay for being in the hospital, everything. And that is not including the storage cost over time. And actually, one point before I go on regarding costs that I'll make related to this issue of storage before we move on is, I agree with you, Robin, about the legal aspects of ongoing storage and even laws that may interfere with or come into play when it comes to your ability to make certain decisions, in particular as it relates to embryos. So that's the legal side. But I feel there's actually another side of that, which is that some people may not want to destroy embryos. And so thinking about the cost and, the long-term years that you may be paying for storage for embryos, that is something to keep in mind, even as you're making the decision about whether to freeze eggs or embryos. Do you want to have to face those decisions later? And how would you face those later, and how would cost come into play? So in addition to the legal aspect, there may be the human element of, I just don't want to destroy my embryo. So maybe I need to think about whether I want to go with embryos or if I want to go with eggs, and the cost that might accompany that. So that's related to cost and storage. But back to the procedural cost, the like I said, the procedure cost me in the middle of $10,000 and $20,000. And there, obviously, could self-pay. You could pay for it if you are fortunate enough to have the ability to do that. That's great. Unfortunately, a lot of insurance providers don't cover this, unfortunately. Some may, but I have yet to become aware of insurance providers that cover something like this. One option may be to check with your employer to see if your employer covers it. Where we live in the Bay Area of California, there are some employers that have that as part of their benefits package for people. So always check to see if your employer would cover something like this related to fertility cost. What I ended up doing was receiving a loan to cover the cost of this procedure and the medications. That ended up being the way that I was able to accomplish it. Otherwise, I would not have been able to do so. Before I embarked on this journey, I wasn't aware personally that there were loans available for something like this, but there are some loans in existence just for this purpose that you may qualify for. So, I would urge, don't just dismiss the fact that you would be able to afford it. If you really want to do it, a loan may very well be an option for you.
Yeah, so that's a very good point. I also want to point out that there's it's really important to maybe shop around to different doctors at least.
Yeah.
At least the doctor that I went with and the clinic that I went with, they did offer a no interest payment plan. Which I mean, in my case, since I had to do a few rounds, it was very, very expensive.
Yeah.
So I mean, and also the clinic that I went with did offer slight discounts if you did multiple rounds. Um, so there's um, so I mean, definitely individual clinics have different payment options. So I would really encourage you to shop around to different clinics and see if they have something that might accommodate your needs. I think and it's also really important to check out, local laws and local legislation, especially in the area of employee health benefits. Tashama did mention this. So in California, there actually is a new law that passed. It's the SB 729, which is supposed to be effective in on July 1st, 2025, which is a little bit before this episode was released. So I would say so in that case, if you're an employee of a large company, there's definitely some more options available for funding with your employee benefits under this new law. So definitely make sure you look into that when you're if you do receive employee benefits, definitely look into that and see if there's any coverage there. Also, like Tashama was saying, there's lots and lots of loans available for this. Sometimes through your fertility clinic, sometimes
Yeah.
extra private loans. I know debt is not the best thing, but if this is something that is very important to you, there's definitely ways and methods that you can help fund this.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's definitely not perfect. At least I haven't seen anything that's any system that's you know, really perfect as far as funding with this, but there's a lot more options than what I initially thought there would be when I
Same.
was on this journey. So
The
definitely,
very same.
yeah.
The and also the legal implications are,
Mhm.
come into play a lot more than I envisioned when I first started on this journey. Apparently, there are also laws about whether you're required to keep unused genetic material. There are a lot of laws are constantly changing and evolving. So just being aware and doing your research about the
Mhm.
framework of laws that may come into play when you're doing something like this, I think is important, just as it is important to absolutely be in consultation with the medical
Mhm.
professional.
Right. Yeah. And like I said before, we do have a video that does touch upon more of these legal topics with
Yes.
unused embryos. So I think so yeah, so definitely check it out and it'll cover some of the topics that Tashama just talked about, which is a very hot button topic right now. So, and it is linked below. And this is probably a good closing point on
Yeah.
this video.
So if you like our
And
content, please like and subscribe so you can be notified when new episodes are released. Thank you so much. As Robin mentioned, there are other episodes on this topic and related to this topic that we urge you to check out. And thank you so much for joining today. It's been nice to discuss this issue with you.
yes, thank you so much for watching our episode. Please stay happy and healthy.